Welcome to the YouTube channel for Sunset Canyon Baptist Church. My name is Russell Dixon, and I have the privilege of serving as the senior pastor here. You know, the only way we can bring messages like the one you're about to watch, both to our YouTube channel and to our podcast, is through the generosity of not only our church family, but also of you, our extended family. So if you would like to contribute to help support the work that God is doing through this ministry financially, you can go to our website at sunsetcanyonchurch.org and simply click on the button that says Give. We hope that this week's message encourages you to seek Jesus, and we pray that it helps you to grow in your walk with Him. Now, here's this week's message.
In His 3-year public ministry, Jesus did many incredible things. He gave sight to the blind. He walked on water. He healed people of diseases. He cast out demons. He also turned over the religious system of that day with His teachings. But one of the most overlooked facets of Jesus' ministry was perhaps the most simple and yet most profound. And it's something that we can still do with others today. He shared meals with people from all walks of life. How can God use you to minister through sharing a simple meal with someone else?
Can you put your hands together and thank our worship team one more time for leading us today? So great. I love that song, Come to the Table. Kelly suggested it a couple weeks ago. I said, it's a great idea. You're going to get to lead it. You got to be careful. Be careful what you volunteer around here. Hey, how many of you put together a March Madness bracket? How many of you are March Madness bracketers? You got a few? How many of you, your March Madness bracket failed miserably after the first round? Yep, absolutely. I feel your pain. Because of that, I've actually stopped doing March Madness brackets because no matter how much data and research you put into it about which teams are doing well and which teams are not doing well, it seems like the people that pick based off of the mascots do better, right? It's like, oh, I like that they're the Pink Panthers and the Pink Panthers ran the table. Right? It's like, I mean, come on, the Pink Panthers were the 15 seed. How did they win, right? So I've just kind of abandoned ship on that. But right now, a lot of people are thinking about March Madness. And when it comes to basketball, I don't have much experience, to be honest. I played when I was younger. I played up until I was about 8th grade. And I was not that great. I was good enough to make the team, but I was the kind of the guy where my shot of me was like, come on, team, let's go. You got it. Go, guys, go. And then the second I got into the game, you better believe that if I got a shot to take, I better not miss. Otherwise, I'm going to be right back here going, come on, guys, let's go. Come on, let's go. But one of the things I learned early on in basketball is that if you want to be successful, you have to pass the ball, right? Matter of fact, if you look at the NCAA teams that are successful, they pass the ball pretty frequently. And not only at the NCAA level, but at the NBA level, that's true as well. Now, the hard thing about that is if you're someone who, the one thing that I could do decently well when I was a kid was couldn't dribble that great, but if I had an open shot, usually I was a decent shot. And so there's this tension because you know you need to pass the ball, but at the same time, if you want to add value to your team, your temptation is to want to do what? To shoot, right? And so there's this tension for players of do I pass the ball or do I shoot the ball? And matter of fact, there have been studies done about teams that actually pass the ball with more frequency. And there's this quote I found from this study. It says this, with the rock zipping around, almost all 5 players on the floor become threats to score in open space. And then it says the open shot, almost regardless of where you get it, is the best shot in the game, and crisp passing creates these uncontested attempts. Now, you're probably thinking, what on earth does basketball and passing have anything to do with the Bible? I hope you're thinking that at this point. And my challenge to you or my proposal to you would be simply this, that basketball players in general, if you want to be successful, there's an element of selflessness that it requires, right? So if you want to pass the ball effectively, you have to be willing to look out more for your team rather than yourself. I find that to be true in God's kingdom as well, right? That many times if we want God to use us, we have to be willing to think of somebody else rather than simply just thinking of ourselves. And so today, we're going to conclude our sermon series that we've been in. We've kind of split it up over the last few weeks. We started 2 weeks, I guess, before spring break We took 2 weeks around spring break to kind of have a spring break messaging series, and then it wasn't even really a series, it was 2 standalone messages. And then today we're going to conclude it with a thought of dinner to serve. And here's what the principle is. The whole idea around this series is that when you look at Jesus' ministry, it had multiple facets. He taught, he did miracles, but then one of the things that you see 10 times in the New Testament is he sits down with people and he breaks bread with them and he shares life with them. And it's not just like religious people. As a matter of fact, he actually engaged people that the rest of the world overlooked at his time. And today, really the heart behind today's message, the first week we opened up with this thought that we as Jesus followers should engage lost people, that we should be seeking to spend time with them. And one great, easy way to do that is to sit down and to share a meal with people. That message was called Dinner with Sinners. And then the next message, we talked about dinner with saints, where we really challenged each other to use the time that we spend around other Jesus followers more effectively. And today, the heart behind today's message is that sitting down to share a meal with someone is a great opportunity to serve them. Most of you would say, if you're here today and you say, I want to be a servant-hearted person, raise your hand. Most of us would say, yes, I would like to be a servant-hearted person. Most of us don't want to be a selfish person. And so the heart of today's message is simply, if we want to be selfless, then what a great opportunity we have to sit down and to share life with them. Mark 10:45, Jesus modeled this in his ministry. He says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, when we look at this message series, and as I think about my role as a pastor, you could really describe my role in a number of ways. Sometimes I don't really know exactly what I do because it's like so many different facets, right? You wear many hats in ministry. I'm kidding, by the way. I know what I do. You're like thinking, this guy, what did we come here today? Pastor Russell, I've been inviting guests for 4 months, and you're telling me I don't know what you're doing. It was a joke. But a lot of what my role from here from the platform is really 2 things. It's to challenge, but also to encourage. And I would say that the first 2 messages in this series, Dinner with Sinners and Dinners with Saints, in some ways were a challenge. They were a challenge to our church family to be more intentional with how we spend our time around non-believers and around our own Christian friends. Today, my hope is that today is actually an encouragement, and here's why I say that. When you look at the strengths of our church, one of the things that I believe is the greatest strengths of our church is how we serve people through this idea of sharing a meal with each other. In many ways, you could call our church Sunset Casserole Baptist Church. Come on, somebody. I'm sure some of you have been volunteered for a meal train when you're going through something, and then like 2.5 seconds later, that thing is filled, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to donate leftovers to the neighbors, right? It's an amazing thing. It's one of the strengths of our church. Matter of fact, in the pastor search process, that was listed by the search firm was one of the strengths of our church, which is amazing. But here's my challenge. Let's not let that only be relegated in the confines of these 4 walls. We have a mission to do, and there is a lost and dying world out there. So as we seek to live out the mission that Jesus came to establish, let us take that strength of ours and leverage it for his glory and for his kingdom. So I want to give you 4 thoughts on how we go about doing that. How can we see opportunities to serve people through sitting down and sharing a meal with them? If you've got a listener guide, wave it at me in the air like you just do care. There we go. I want to give you 4 thoughts before we dive in, give you the main thought today. Now, the message today is really, really simple. The heart of this series is really simple, but I don't know about you, but in my life, some of the most simple things are the worst things that I do, right? Meaning that I'm not able to do some of the most simple things that God calls us to do, and I'm sure it's true in your life as well. So the main thought today is one of the most simple ways to serve the needs of others, y'all say serve, is to sit down and to share a meal with them. Now you're probably thinking, wow, that's not rocket science, Pastor Russell. You're right. When's the last time we've done that? When's the last time we've set time aside to serve the needs of people? If you're like me, so many times we get caught in our own thing. And so Jesus is going to show us from 2 different passages today. We're going to look at Luke chapter 9, where Jesus feeds the 5,000. And then we're going to look at Luke chapter 14, where Jesus goes to have dinner in the home of a Pharisee, and there is someone there who is sick and not well. And that is a great opportunity to meet people's needs as well. Point number 1, if you're taking notes on your listener guide, write this down. The first thing we've got to do if we want to serve other people through this ministry of meals is we've got to see the need. Y'all say, see the need. So in Luke chapter 9, Jesus is teaching. He's in his public ministry, and he starts to retreat. He starts to go away, but then the crowds followed him. And in verse 11 in chapter 9, it says, but the crowds found out where he was going, and they followed him. He was trying to get a break. He was like, man, I'm tired. But notice Jesus' response. What does he do? It says he welcomed them. He welcomed them. Why do you think he welcomed them? Well, he knew there was a need in their life. He said, no, even though Jesus was fully God and also fully man. So because he was fully man, he probably needed a break to rest, but he knew the people had a need. And it says he taught them about the kingdom of God. And then in Luke chapter 14, Jesus goes to this home of a Pharisee. And he sits down to have dinner with them, and there is a man there who is not well. And it says there was a man there whose arms and legs were swollen. And then Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in religious law, is it permitted in the law to heal people on the Sabbath day or not? And then he goes on to say in verses 12 and 13, he says, then he turned to the host. When you put on a luncheon or a banquet, he said, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors. In other words, don't invite just the people that you like. He goes on to say, for they will invite you back, and that will be your only reward. And then look at what he says to invite. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. In other words, invite the least of these. The least of these. Jesus knew in both of these passages what it meant to see needs in front of him. His entire public ministry was seeing needs and recognizing them. And I find in our modern era of being so busy, how many times in my life, and I'm sure in your life, do we miss the needs right in front of us? A lot of times, it's not for a bad thing. We're doing things that are good. We're going to work. We are living our life. We're doing things that God has called us to do, but we miss opportunities that God brings right in front of us. And not only does Jesus see this great need when he seeks to feed the 5,000, but he also sees a need with this man who was ill and not well. Here's why that's significant. In the first century, if you were sick, you were considered a pariah or an outcast. And so the fact that there was a sick person even sitting around the table was vastly significant. And not only that, Jesus goes on and heals this man on the Sabbath. That would have been shocking to the religious leaders around him. What was Jesus trying to do? He was trying to flip the script of the day. He was saying at the end of the day, people have needs, and our lives should be far more about serving people than they are preserving our own appearance to others. Amen? That we should be seeking to see other people in front of us. And Jesus established this principle that I think is so true for us. If you've got a listener guide, write this down. Jesus saw people that the rest of the world overlooked. Jesus saw people that the rest of the world overlooked. And so many times in our lives, we overlook opportunities that God brings in front of us. Maybe you've got a friend or a coworker that's going through something. Maybe you've got somebody in your family and you know you should minister to them, but for some reason you keep missing that opportunity. H. Jackson Brown is an American author, and he said it this way: nothing is more expensive than a missed opportunity. Nothing. Nothing is more expensive than a missed opportunity. What does that look like in your life? Is there someone that God's been tugging your heart after, that you know you should be making time to serve their needs and not so much looking out for yourself? I don't know what that looks like in your life, but I know for many of us, there are people that God brings apart our path that we should be seeking to minister to. And here's why. If we want to live like Jesus, which most of us, I would say, would want to, we should be looking for the needs around us, because that's what he did. Jesus sought to meet the needs in front of us, and he lived his days looking for those needs. So we've got to see the need first, again, and that means every day waking up going, God, make me aware to what you want me to do. Help me not to miss opportunities right in front of me. Help me not be so consumed with the next thing on my to-do list that I don't miss something you bring right in front of me. So Jesus sees the needs, and then what does he do? He serves the needs. He serves the needs. And I would argue he serves the needs no matter what it might cost him. In both of these passages, it actually cost Jesus something to minister to the people in front of him. Luke chapter 9, verse 16, Jesus, remember, he had tried to retreat. He had tried to get away, and then the crowds followed him, and he knew they had a need, and so he realized this is probably going to cost me my comfort, and this is going to cost me my time in order to meet these needs. Look at verse 16. It says, Jesus took the loaves and 2 fish, looked up towards heaven and blessed them. And then it says, then breaking the loaves into pieces, look at what it says here. It says, he kept giving the bread and fish to the disciples. Notice that it said he kept doing it. In other words, even though he was fully God and fully man, it still cost him some time, right? He was like, man, I'm going to have to feed these 5,000 people. We don't know exactly what he was thinking in that moment, but we know that it cost him his time. Luke chapter 9, when Jesus heals this man on the Sabbath around a table with religious leaders, that probably cost him his reputation as well. Many of those people would not have looked highly upon Jesus for doing that. And Jesus did these things. He served people no matter what it cost him. Why? Because he realized an important principle. If you've got a listener guide, write this down. Sometimes we have to meet the need in someone's hands in order to open their hearts. Sometimes when God brings that opportunity right in front of us, we have to serve a physical need. Why? So that God can open up a spiritual opportunity. And in other words, what does that mean for us? What does that practically mean for us? Sometimes we have to serve people before we can share with people. Yes, we want to share the gospel. Yes, we want to take the good news out into the world. But sometimes that looks like meeting a practical, tangible need in their life before they're willing to listen, right? You probably have had many people in your life where you know they're not Jesus followers and you feel like God is wanting to use you to minister to them. But sometimes the best way you can do that is ministering through a physical need first, and then later on, God opens the opportunity for you to share with them. Now, that's not an excuse to hide behind that and say, well, I'm only called to serve, I'm not called to share. We're all called to share our faith, no matter what we do, no matter what our job is, no matter what our role is. Jesus wants to use us to advance the Great Commission, and there's no plan B. You are God's plan A. There's no plan B. There's no fallback plan. God's not sitting there in heaven going, man, all right, I've got my backup plan, right? You're it, and I'm it. That's how he is choosing to advance the Great Commission. But especially for some of you who maybe the thought of sharing your faith feels terrifying, believe it or not, I know what that feels like. One of the best ways you can open that door is start by meeting the physical needs in front of you. And he does this in both of these passages, and he did it in spite of what it might cost him. What could that look like in your life? Well, maybe you've got a neighbor that's going through a difficult season, and perhaps you are in the middle of one of the busiest seasons of your life. Spring sports, work's crazy, it's tax season, come on somebody, right? The job is nuts. The kids are nuts. I don't know what that's like because our kids are perfect / not, right? And yet God is putting an opportunity on your heart and in your mind, and you know it's going to be inconvenient. Jesus is modeling for us what that looks like, to be willing to step out even though it might cost you. Perhaps you're a parent and your kids are in a difficult, stressful season. And, let's say you're a parent of a toddler and you spend all this time to try to go out of your way to accommodate their needs, and you make dinner for them and you put the dinner right there and they throw it on the floor. Again, I'm speaking hypothetically. I've never experienced that before, right? But perhaps that's you, and God's calling you to, no, be patient with them. Serve them. Even though it's going to cost you your frustration, it's going to cost you some patience. We only have a certain level of patience sometimes without Jesus' help. But Jesus models up for us what it looks like to serve people even though it might cost us. In World War II, during the Blitzkrieg, which was the bombing of England by Germany, what happened was a lot of the homes were just completely decimated, and many of these houses were not able to actually make basic meals for themselves. And so there was a group of ladies that got together and decided, we're going to do something about this. And so they started making these little canteen meals out of their own resources, out of their own supplies, which cost them their time, cost them their finances. And then they went out to these homes that had been decimated, and they delivered these meals to them. Many times risking their lives because, hello, they're going out into a war zone, and they were willing to risk it, even though it might cost them something. Well, that movement then moved over to America, and that movement has since become this organization that you might have heard of called Meals on Wheels. Yeah, Meals on Wheels was started because of that. Which, if you're not familiar with Meals on Wheels, it's an organization that seeks to serve the elderly and the underprivileged that don't have a means of meeting basic needs. So what does it mean for us? Well, Napoleon Hill said it this way: great achievement is usually born out of great sacrifice. And it's never the result of selfishness. It's never the result of selfishness. So what does that mean for us? Well, if we want to do things of significance, we have to be willing to sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice? And am I willing to sacrifice to meet the needs around you, even though it will often cost us something? So, got to see the needs, got to seek to serve the needs, even when it costs you. And then the third thing we've got to do is we've got to seek others to join the effort. Y'all say others. So Jesus, what's fascinating about this, particularly in Luke chapter 9, although he does the miracle himself, he doesn't only do it by himself. Look at what it says in Luke chapter 9, verse 13 and then 15 and 16. It says, so the disciples come to Jesus. They realize the 5,000 people are hungry. And look at what he says. You feed them. In other words, that's your job, right? He's saying, that ain't my problem. That's a you problem. And then, of course, he knows the disciples are going to say, but Jesus, we only have 5 loaves of bread and only 2 fish. Are you expecting us to go to town? There's not an H-E-B in town. I mean, they're still building it. It hasn't opened yet. I thought it was supposed to be open 3 months ago, but it's still not done yet. I live closer to Austin. You know, what are we supposed to do, Jesus? And then so he says, okay. So he takes the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he looks up to heaven, and he blesses them. And then notice what he says. He says, he kept on giving the bread and fish. Go to verse 15. Go to verse 15. So all people keep going, 16. Then it says, he kept giving the bread and fish to who? To the disciples. He didn't just do it himself. Yes, he performed the miracle himself, but he involved them in the process. It's powerful, isn't it? That he gave them the opportunity to do ministry with him. Jesus understood a very profound concept, and that is that ministry is often best done as a team sport. Ministry is often best done as a team sport. One of the best things we can do as Jesus followers is invite other people into the process. There's maybe people in your life that God wants to not just use you, but use them as well. Just like a basketball team, if you want to be successful, and if I was covered up with 5 guys trying to shoot a shot, and there's 4 other guys open right there, what's the best thing I can do? Pass the ball off to my teammates, right? And we don't involve other people in the process so that we can simply sit on the bench. That's not why. We involve others in the process so we can accomplish God's mission as a team. We're better together, right? Amen? That God has gifted each and every one of us differently, and sometimes the smartest thing we can do as a Jesus follower is realize there's somebody else in my life that God can use to reach them. Now, I want to talk about practically how that could look for you. Perhaps you have a coworker or a friend or a family member that's going through a difficult season. Maybe they've lost their job. Maybe they are having difficulty with their kids. Maybe they're going through infertility. Just imagine it's a situation that you personally don't feel equipped to handle or minister to them. But you have a friend in your life who is more than equipped. One of the best things we could do as Jesus followers is set up a time, set up a place for you to be able to bring that other Jesus follower in so that the 2 of y'all or 3 of y'all or however many that is can then minister to them together. I don't know what that might be in your life, but I see in my life consistently there are people that God brings apart in my path that I think immediately, perhaps it's somebody that I know, they're an engineer, and I've got an engineering buddy that would so easily connect with them. And I'm thinking, hey, I need to go to lunch with them, but I need to bring my friend so-and-so with me. One of the best things we can do is involve other people in the process. There's a pastor who said a quote that I'm about to share with you. And before I share this quote with you, it's a guy named Brian Houston, who's the pastor of Hillsong Church. And if you've been following church ministry lately, things are not exactly going super well for Hillsong right now. He was no longer the senior pastor at Hillsong. It's a whole long story. But for many years of his ministry, God was doing great things in and through their church. Many of the songs that we sing in church are a result of Hillsong. And I actually have personal friends that served under Brian Houston for a long season of time. And so even though there have been some things that have happened lately in their ministry, I don't fully always align theologically with where they stand. So I just want to give that caveat before I share this quote. I know sometimes when you say things from the platform, you have to be sure, like, oh my goodness, we're going to full-blown name it and claim it gospel here. It's not what I'm saying. However, I do think there's great truth in what Brian Houston shared. And look at what he shared. He said this: avoid building around only one person's ministry gifting. Longevity is in a team, not an individual. Great churches are not built on the gifts or talents of a few, but on the sacrifice of many. Sacrifice of many. That's what God calls us to do. Aren't you thankful that you're a part of a church that many people sacrifice to have what we have today? That what we get to walk in today has come from the sacrifice of so many people. And make no mistake about it, God does want to use us individually for ministry, but he also wants to use us collectively for ministry. Who are those people in your life that you can bring into the process to help minister to people in your life? So we've got to see the need. Got to serve the need, even if it costs us. Got to seek others to get involved with us. And then finally, when we do those things, what happens is God works through us and we get to see the fruit. Y'all say fruit. So Jesus does this miracle. He gives the bread and the loaves to the disciples. They feed the 5,000. In Luke chapter 9, verse 17, look at what it says. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward, the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. Everyone was satisfied. Everyone was fulfilled. We've got to see the needs around us. We've got to be willing to serve the needs around us, even when it costs us. And then when we do that and we seek others to get in our corner with us, God is faithful to work in and through us. Make no mistake about it. God does the work. But aren't you grateful today that he chooses to use broken and sinful people like me and you to be a part of his process? What a gift it is for us to have the privilege to do ministry. And when God does that work, we get to see the fruit. I'll close with this story. This past fall was not exactly a great fall for Auburn's football team. I went to Auburn for 3 years. I didn't graduate from there, so I'm kind of a fair weather fan when it comes to their sports teams. And so when they don't do well, I'm like, yeah, I didn't graduate from there. I just went there for 3 years. But they had hired a coach named Brian Harsin from Boise State. And I have a few friends that still live there and are around their sports programs. And I hadn't heard the best of things. Not only was Auburn's football record not that good, but I hadn't heard the best of things about particularly Coach Harsin and his character and some of the people around them. And so if you follow sports, you know that about midway through the fall, the Auburn administration decided to let Brian Harsin go. And there was a guy who was on his staff that had played football at Auburn named Carnell, a.k.a. Cadillac Williams. That's his nickname. Cadillac, I had the privilege of interacting with him a few times. Not a whole lot, but Cadillac played in the NFL for a few years, was a first-round pick, and he was named the interim head coach for Auburn. He was a great man. He is a great man of faith. And as I read articles about Cadillac's mission for him and the coaching staff for what limited time they had to coach the team, there was a common phrase that I kept seeing. Our job is to serve the players. Our job is to serve the players. I kept seeing it in article after article after article. Our job is to serve the players. I saw interviews that he did. My whole goal is to serve the players. I just want to spend time with the players. Now that sounds really simple, but think about from his perspective, he's probably trying to climb the coaching ladder, and a lot of coaches would have seen this as their opportunity, right? It's my time to schmooze the boosters. It's my time to try to win. There was a lot of people that were trying to lobby for him to be the head coach. And he said, no, that's not what it's about. It's about me and the rest of this coaching staff serving the players. I had friends that said that they saw him in the lunchroom with people, and he was sitting down to share meals with them and spend time with them because he cared about them first. So he sought to serve the players. And then the next thing that he did was there was a longtime FCA pastor there named Chet Williams who was there when I was there. And Brian Harsin had kind of not removed him from the team, but had kind of distanced Brother Chet from the team. And so Cadillac said, we're here to serve the players. And then what he did was he brought Chet in really close. Really close. We're just going to love on these guys. We're going to love on these guys. We're going to pour into them. We're going to spend time with them. We're going to walk all up in their life. Their record on the field, 2-2. Nothing to write home about. But by the end of the fall, 12 Auburn football players gave their lives to Jesus. Gave their lives to Jesus. On the field record, ho hum. Eternal record, undefeated. Cadillac knew what God cared about. Here's what I would leave you with today. Serve people. Serve people. Die to yourself and serve people. And watch God use that to save people. Amen?